So here we are. Finally, we've got 3 of my favorite clone troopers in the vintage collection, and these figures actually did come out a little while back. I just never got around to making a video on them because I was lazy. But now that we've got new Star Wars content coming out like The Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, which the KAMINO ARC troopers are very relevant to, I thought it would be a good time to take a look at all 3 of these figures together. Realistically though, I think it's going to be nice to go back into the past and take a look at 3 of the Clone Wars most iconic clone troopers. If you've been a Star Wars figure collector for a while, especially if you're like me and you started collecting with the initial Clone Wars line, then you definitely remember the ARC Trooper commanders Havoc, Colt, and Blitz, the leaders of Rancor Battalion. And you may remember how the original figures of all 3 of these guys are incredibly expensive. All 3 of them ended up becoming some of the most rare and sought after Star Wars figures. And it seems to be the case that they just didn't make a whole lot of copies of those original figures. And of course, with them being somewhat obscure but also iconic clone troopers from the Clone Wars, they're going to end up being expensive. If you go back and you look at the prices of clone trooper figures right now, especially from that Clone Wars line, there's a lot of them that are worth quite a bit of money. So with that being said, it's kind of a big deal that Hasbro decided to completely remake these characters in the vintage collection and release them all single carded. Of course, they had to go and make all of them Walmart exclusives. However, during the release of these figures, I kept watch. I stayed vigilant. And the second these guys dropped for pre-order, I was there. And I managed to snag 2 of each just so I could have 1 in the packaging and 1 outside. Also because I was pretty concerned about the paint apps for these figures, and I actually got extremely lucky with mine. I got 3 that look near perfect. So getting down to it, of course, they're in the vintage collection. They're each on a card back. I think all of these look pretty good. They decided to take actual shots from the Clone Wars show instead of just having those garbage CGI renders that they have a lot of the times. And I think each of the card backs looks really good. My favorite is Havoc. You got the red background over there and mixing with like the blue in his armor. I don't know. I just think it's like a really good looking card back. And getting into the figures, while these all may be repaints of that TVC ARC Trooper mold, I think these are the best looking versions of that mold we've ever got. My favorite of the 3 has always been Commander Blitz. I just think the yellow deco on his armor has just been super iconic. And you've also got that diamond pattern on the skirt, which just looks really cool. And it's not something we see really at all with other clone troopers. And just the asymmetrical stripes on the armor, it's just a very cool look, and it's one of my favorite clone trooper designs ever, probably. I know most people are probably very familiar with these figures at this point, but I'm gonna go ahead and go over the articulation a little bit. With the helmet on, you've got a decent range on the neck joint, but these pauldrons are going to hinder it a little bit, so there's that. Then there's the elbows, which are pretty stiff. This is one of the older molds of the vintage collection, so you're just not going to have that great of articulation, especially with all of the added armor that's on here. It hinders a lot. Like, you can barely use those hip joints. The knees go back a decent amount. You do get ankle rockers, which is really nice, and you also have hinges on the wrists. And so for the most part, I would say you do get decent articulation. You just can't use a lot of it on here. Even with the torso, it's just very restricted. And just real quick, let's take off the helmet, and we can see that Commander Blitz just has a pretty basic head underneath. We never saw his helmet get removed in the show, so I guess they just went for the basic clone trooper look. On all 3 helmets, the rangefinder does come down, although I have super glued the rangefinders because they are attached to the helmet very loosely, and they will just slip and slide around whenever you move them, which gets pretty annoying. So I didn't want that anymore. I super glued all of them. But yes, the rangefinders can move, and you can also detach them from the helmet. So that pretty much does it for Commander Blitz and the overview for this mold. Really, what's great about it is how it looks, the sculpting, the proportions. It looks like an ARC Trooper almost exactly. And I'll throw up pictures so you can see. And in my opinion, this is one of the best Clone Trooper molds we've ever had in a Hasbro figure. And just going over the accessories real quick, each figure does come with the exact same accessories. They each have a removable helmet with a head underneath. It's not alternate heads, just removable helmets. You've got 2 blaster pistols, a carbine, and the blaster rifle, which really is the most that you could wish for with a clone trooper. I mean, you get all the different kinds of weapons, you get a removable helmet. It's pretty nice. They kind of treated these figures as if they were deluxe, but I don't believe they went for the deluxe pricing of around 30 bucks. These were around the same price as normal TVC figures, which was really awesome at the time. And now we take a look at Commander Havoc, which is probably my second favorite. I just think the blue on here looks really awesome. It's not super dark like on the 501st Legion. It's actually a little bit lighter, kind of like a pastel color just a little bit, and I think it looks really good. Just going into some of the deeper details of this figure, you do have holsters on the skirt alongside some pouches, which you can fit the blaster pistols into, and over on the backpack you can attach the carbine in the little peg hole right there, which is really convenient that you can store all of the weapons this figure comes with on him while he's holding one of them. That's just a really awesome feature that all 3 of these guys have. I have always loved the design of the Clone Wars ARC Trooper. You've got the gray armor plating over the chest, and you've also got a bit more armor plating over on the helmet, because remember, these are kind of like a mix between Phase 1 and Phase 2 helmets. So while the helmets we get here aren't an exact replica of the helmets that we see in the show, they're as close as they could be. I'm pretty satisfied with them, but the indents along the side of the helmet here should be a bit deeper, because I'm pretty sure this gray area is supposed to highlight even more armor that's added on top of the helmet. So just a reinforcement of that, basically. Something that's also really great, at least for my copies of the figures, is that the paint apps for the helmets are near flawless. And man, I just love the designs of these helmets. I love how they were able to mix some elements of the Clone Wars and live action designs. Of course, you just have the dotted lines along the mouthpiece, which is more akin to the animated design, and the overall sculpt of the figure is done in a more realistic style. And taking off Commander Havoc's helmet, you see we get something a little bit different here. He's got sideburns and a bit of a goatee going on. I don't believe we saw his helmet come off in the show either, but I believe they kind of just did this to design it after the paint job on his helmet, where he's kind of got sideburns on the helmet right there. And so they just did that to make the figure more unique, and so it wasn't just a complete repaint of the Commander Havoc head sculpt. I think it does look a little bit goofy, but I think for the scale, it's a decent job. And finally, we get onto Commander Colt, and I'm pretty sure he is the leader of all 3 of them. I could be wrong, but they made him look the most important in the show. He had the most screen time. He got killed off by Asajj Ventress. Am I jealous of him? No. No, I am not. But I do think, unfortunately, he is the worst looking of the 3 figures here. I still think he looks really good, but for whatever reason, they just decided to paint his helmet differently than the others. Both Blitz and Havoc have that dotted design on the mouthpiece, which I just think looks more accurate. It looks better, makes it look less cartoonish, ironically. And then you look at Commander Colt, and he's just got a solid line painted through the mouthpiece. I don't think it looks bad. I just think it's weird that they made it look different, and it does make him look a little bit like he's like out of a coloring book or something like that. It just doesn't look as good. Of course, he does have that awesome skull design on the helmet. Commander Colt has always been one of the coolest looking clone troopers. I think most people can agree on that. Just the combination of the dark blues, the grays, and the maroon colors on his armor. It's just a very iconic selection of colors, especially for clone troopers. With you've got divisions like the Wolfpack Battalion, which kind of have the same colors going on, and so it's just a really popular color choice to have. And so I think that's one reason why he's always been so popular. And just like the other 2, I think this figure looks pretty good, but he's not my favorite. I think Blitz just takes the cake on being my favorite. I think back in the 2nd grade, I had a folder for my papers, which actually had really cool artwork of Captain Rex on the front of it. I'll throw that up. And then on the back, it had a picture of Commander Havoc, which was kind of the way that I was introduced to the character before I even watched the show, which is just like a fun fact about my childhood. And taking Commander Colt's helmet off, you can see we get a much different head sculpt underneath there, and I think, clearly it looks really painted on. I think it looks kind of bad, honestly. but the paint and the sculpting for the face itself does look very good. But it is just nice that we did get removable helmets with these guys. So all in all, I think we got some pretty epic figures here with the Vintage Collection KAMINO ARC Troopers. That's going to be Commander Havoc, Commander Colt, and Commander Blitz. 3 of my favorite clone troopers ever, and these are really great depictions of these characters. Once again, they are all repaints of each other, but that's how they are in universe. So yeah, I am very satisfied with all 3 of these figures. They're great. I definitely recommend you go get them before they perhaps become even more expensive. And at that point, I'm just coping because I want to justify the money I spent. But these figures definitely live up to the hype. I think these are really great and definitely worthy of being in anyone's clone collection. So that about does it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Bye.